Okay. So once again, good morning, good afternoon, East Coast, West Coast. Thank you so much for joining us today on this beautiful day for our August 2020 Coffee and CEU event from the DBA SIG. Before we get to our main event, we just have a couple of housekeeping items that I do want to review. Once again, this event is being recorded and it's going to be uploaded into our DBA page after the event. If you would like to collect CEUs, please make sure to stay in the event for the entire time. We're going to be monitoring the attendance throughout the presentation. And after the presentation, a short survey is going to be sent out that just has some questions on the information from today. So please make sure to fill that out because that's how we're going to be able to send you your CEU certificate for one BACB Type 2 Ethics CE. Since we are going to be monitoring the attendance, just make sure that your full name is going to be displayed on Zoom so that we know who you are. If you're logging in through a phone, go ahead and email us at disseminateaba@gmail.com with your phone number used, your full name, and your email. And also, just to limit background noise, please mute yourself if you can. It will help everyone have the best experience possible. And lastly, our fundraiser is still on. All proceeds are going to go to our dissemination grant, so please support us and your fellow ABAers in the sharing of our wonderful science. You can also get some cool stuff. I don't know if you guys can see my baseball tee, and I got my mug going on. You can also get these cool things and support a great cause at the same time. I will be linking that in the chat, so please check it out. Now, today for our event, we are super, super incredibly lucky to have the one and the only Brandon May teach us about behavioral sports psychology. So I'm going to pass it on to Brandon.
Thanks, everybody. I'm glad to be here. Glad you guys could join us. And just as a quick disclosure, I got 5 kids at home. So on Saturday morning, sometimes that's more quiet than others. We'll just have to see how that all goes. So get a little bit of background noise. Don't judge me. I promise I'm a good parent most of the time. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Hopefully you guys can see that. Will somebody yell at me if you can't?
We can. We're good.
You can. Perfect. All right. So as Gloria said, my name is Brandon May. I am a behavior analyst practicing at the School of Medicine at Washington University in St. Louis. And I'm also the president and CEO of Elite ABA Services, which is my private practice where we provide services for individuals with autism and developmental disabilities, but also provide some of these more exercise and sport-specific applications of behavior analysis. I'm also a PhD candidate at SIU Carbondale, with my major professor being Mark Dixon. And my anticipated graduation date is December of this year, pending dissertation and all that, which COVID has made real fun. An outline of kind of what we're going to go through today. We're going to start with an overview of what behavioral sports psychology is. We're going to do a quick overview of some of the exercise applications and participants with developmental disabilities that we've been working on recently. I know that's not kind of how this was advertised, so I don't want to spend a ton of time on it, but I also know that this is a behavior analysis group, and that's the population that a lot of us work the most with. And so I kind of want to make you aware quickly of some of the work we've been doing in that arena. Then we'll go over these 3 studies that I've been conducting with a local university that has Division I athletes, where we're using biofeedback and velocity-based training, ACT and exercise discounting, and sports analytics. So those 3 are more in the realm of working with the population that was advertised here with these Division I athletes. Behavioral sports psychology is kind of an overview. It's the use of behavior analytic principles and techniques to enhance the performance of all those that are associated with sports. So that includes athletes, coaches, general managers, if you're working with sports scientists or kind of those like weightlifting and sports performance coaches. We're using behavioral sports psychology and the principles of behavior analysis to work with all these individuals with the ultimate goal of improving sports performance. That's a really broad definition, and Reed and Lucelli break it down into kind of these 5 main tenets, some of which overlap with more traditional behavior sports, or with more traditional sports psychology, some of which are points of differentiation. One is the identification and operationalization of behaviors related to sports performance. So again, as behavior analysts, we're really focused on kind of not just generally want improvements, but we want improvements in this specific target behavior. What does it look like? What's the function? All those kind of things. And all those principles are still relevant in the behavioral sports psychology realm. We focus on both the antecedent and consequent variables related to sports performance. We look at contingency only applications and some of these cognitive behavioral applications. And I would include both kind of the CBT or the second wave behavioral sciences, but also the third wave sciences as well. So ACT and all the mindfulness approaches, those kind of things are included in a behavioral sports psychology approach as well. One of the main features of behavioral sports psychology and the main distinguishing features is the reliance on single subject design. So I'm mostly going to present single subject research today. We do have a couple, I guess we have 2 studies that are doing more group design. And so we'll talk about that and when you apply those things as well. And then we have this concept of social validity, which is, kind of the main pieces of do we see socially significant change? Do the participants that are involved find the procedures acceptable? And those kind of things. So we're looking at those 5 main tenets as kind of the underlying features of behavioral sports psychology. And then for the history, again, these are just kind of brief overviews. There's some really nice reviews that go into these things in more depth. But kind of the broad strokes here, in the 1960s, general sports psychology started taking off, and we had the kind of the landmark publications of these couple journals. So the Journal of Sports Behavior, the Journal of Sports Psychology, were started in the 1960s. And then in the early 70s, we had a couple publications that were really important to kind of establish this new kind of side project or this different science, behavioral sports psychology, the development and control of behavior in sport and physical education. It was published in Russell and Seidentop in 1972. And then McKenzie and Russell published the first sport-specific article in JABA in 1974, and that was like a self-monitoring program for swimmers. And then kind of if you're using 74 as kind of the beginning of the behavioral sports psychology, or kind of this single subject design, behavior analytic principle focused and application to sports, from 74 to 2003, we saw this increase, and this figure on the right shows kind of what that looks like over that 30-year period, where we saw that the publication of single subject behavioral sports psychology articles remain pretty consistent in the behavioral journals. So your JABA, your behavior interventions, those kind of journals. But we were seeing a lot more publications in the more sports specific journals, right? So I think that's relevant because it shows that this science wasn't just accepted by behavior analysts, but that the people that were actually using this science in their day-to-day application were publishing these articles and using that information to inform their practice. And then a recent update by Schenk and Miltenberger in 2019 kind of reviewed all the applications of behavioral sports psychology, and they found 101 total articles that were published across 21 sports using 23 different procedures. So again, I just kind of want to briefly highlight the breadth of the literature that's out there and kind of the application across a wide variety of sports. I have this table here that shows, this is kind of like one panel, right? So there's a lot of different sports, but it has it organized by sports, the target behavior, the procedures that were used, and then which articles were specifically the authors that wrote the individual articles. So we have kind of it broken down in a nice way here. And I would definitely recommend anybody who's interested in this topic to go find that. It was published in Behavioral Interventions. They have some really great topics and some great tables that you can look at to see how it's organized. But again, the main points here are just a lot of different articles, a lot of different sports, and a lot of different procedures are utilized to create change in these sports performance targets. So again, I want to move pretty quickly through this promoting physical fitness section. I think it's important. I think it's kind of can be considered part of a behavioral sports psychology approach, but it's not really the focus of this talk. I just kind of want to hit these things quickly for you guys to give you an overview of some of what we have going on in this realm. Just broadly, so you guys have if you don't have some of this information, I think it's important as kind of framing the issue. So over 2/3 of adults in the United States over 20 are overweight or obese. Obesity reduces life expectancy by as much as 20 years. And when individuals are overweight or obese, their quality of life is much lower than individuals that are at a healthy weight. the United States Department of Health and Human Services has these recommendations on like how frequently you should exercise, which is obviously related to being overweight and being obese. And only less than a fourth of adults actually meet those recommendations. So in addition to that, individuals with developmental disabilities have even greater obesity rates than individuals that are non-developmentally disabled. And they have higher rates of those secondary health conditions as a result. So greater prevalence of heart disease and diabetes and things like sleep apnea. So all these secondary health conditions related to unhealthy weight and reduced life expectancies as a result. You guys are probably mostly behavior analysts, so I think you have a good idea that we have a variety of different procedures that are effective in creating behavior change in this population. But we hadn't ever applied any of those procedures to what's called high intensity interval training, which is basically a way to raise heart rate during exercise, even though that's been shown to be an effective procedure to create physiological change in typically developing individuals. So what we did was we implemented a lottery reinforcement system to target heart rate during exercise in participants with developmental disabilities. And what we saw was if we used like a changing criterion design, set target heart rates, we saw that when we implemented lottery reinforcement, individuals consistently met those exercise intensity goals. So they were able to effectively modulate their heart rate to the target criteria, and that we over time raised their heart rate to a prescriptive range based on that high intensity interval recommendations for their age and weight. The next one I want to go over quickly is a project where we were reducing the pace of eating in individuals with Down syndrome. And so kind of the background here is individuals with developmental disabilities across the board are more likely to eat rapidly. Eating rapidly is associated with a lot of health conditions, including choking, vomiting, aspiration, and then overeating and obesity. And so the individuals we worked with ate really fast and they were all obese. There have been some studies that have demonstrated efficacy in slowing down eating pace, but most of them require aversive techniques such as response blocking. And so we implemented a treatment package that included a timer, a DRL, which was basically just verbal praise, and a token reinforcement system. And again, implemented a changing criterion design to shape eating pace to a recommended range. And we saw that over time, individuals reach that appropriate pace of eating using this token reinforcement, and that they really adhered nicely to whatever that contingency was. So when we set the timer, the goal to say 15 seconds in between bites, everyone ate pretty close to that 15 seconds between bites. We didn't see a lot of deviation in those results. And then the third and final study I want to go over real quickly with application of kind of health and nutrition towards developmental disabilities is this application of token reinforcement to water consumption. So beverage consumption is an area of nutrition that has been shown to contribute to obesity, and individuals with developmental disabilities have a lot of risk factors that are associated with more consumption of sugar sweetened beverages. So they drink more soda, they drink more juice, they drink more of these beverages where they're getting these empty calories. And so what we wanted to do was during dinner time, provide a token reinforcement system to see if we could get individuals in a group home to drink more water. And this is the group data. So we had 14 total residents that we worked with. We saw during baseline, their average water consumption during dinner was 36%. We implemented this token system and saw that we had 89% of opportunities residents were consuming water. When we took the tokens away and just asked them to continue to drink water, we saw a reduction close to baseline levels. Implemented token reinforcement again and got, again, close to 90% adherence to that goal. And then we faded reinforcement by 50%. So we went from tokens for every dinner that you consumed water to now you have to consume water during 2 dinners to receive token reinforcement. And we're able to maintain our target behavior in a pretty similar range. So 83% of dinners, participants were consuming water. This is the individual data for the boys. So I have 2 different panels. I just presented the boys here. So again, for the group, we saw general adherence across the board, and each participant, each resident, also individually, we saw significant behavior change where we were able to increase water consumption and maintain that when we faded reinforcement. All right, so moving into the studies working with individuals with Division I athletes. So this is, we're working with individuals on what's called velocity-based training with Division I athletes. So velocity-based training as kind of a context here is, traditionally individuals will get prescribed a certain weight that they'll lift on any given exercise, right? So if you're doing a bench press, you might be bench pressing 135 pounds. And that's based generally on like a percentage of how much you can lift for one lift, right? So if you can lift 250 pounds during your bench press one time, we'll take a percentage of that, and that'll be what we target during your exercise and your strength training. Velocity-based training recognizes that based on a variety of different setting events, you might have the ability to lift more one day and be more fatigued the next day and not be able to lift as much. And so it, during each of your individual repetitions, how much or what the speed of that bar and that weight through time is, and you're trying to hit a given prescribed velocity, right? So in that way, if you have, if you're stronger one day and you're able to lift more faster, you can add more to the bar. If you're having a day where you can't lift quite as much because you didn't eat well or you didn't sleep well, something like that, then this process allows you to adjust that weight and to lift less amounts to keep you safe and to continue to demonstrate gains. Some of the advantages of that I've just kind of hit, but it also provides some instantaneous feedback for you so that you can use that as a strategy to affect behavior change as well. I'm gonna show a quick video on the push system, which is the system that we use to actually track velocity during training with our athletes. Can you guys hear that? Somebody chime in and tell me.
Yes, we can.
Beautiful, thank you. All right, so I recognize that's more of a promotional video than necessarily an informative video, but the best thing I found that I think showed kind of the way we use the system when we're working with athletes. So the things that you saw there were that the athlete is putting it on either the bar or their body. It's a sensor that measures movement through space and time. And so you can track velocity, but you can also track things like form and making sure that you're demonstrating that appropriate target behavior, that you're lifting in a way that's going to maximize effect and minimize injury. It's a system that also provides that instantaneous feedback. So you saw that individual was posting their phone right in front of the lift station. They were able to see with each repetition what their velocity was. And then at the end, you saw him rate his perceived level of exertion. So I know as behavior analysts, we're sometimes skeptical of the self-report data. But there is good research saying that individuals that after their workout can accurately report their perceived level of exertion or how hard they worked during a workout. And so that's another piece you can monitor over time is like, if I lifted with this prescribed load this fast, how exhausted am I, kind of thing. So that was the system that we used to track to I guess implement an intervention and to track progress over time, and it's called the push system. Um, so we had two separate kind of larger studies that we did working with Division I athletes in this vein. So we had a group study where we had 350 participants. So that's everybody in the college athletics program participated in this study. And it was basically just a pre-post. We weren't able to randomly control anyone to different groups. It was just, again, a pre-post. What were you doing at baseline? What were you doing after we used this intervention? And then we had a couple different single subject designs where we had multiple baselines between athletes and between different lift loads. So if we checked, we would collect stable state baseline, and if we had it, and then at that point, we would intervene. And our intervention was using this biofeedback intervention I'm going to discuss later. But we did that with a variety of different loads. So athlete A would lift 150 pounds, 200 pounds, and 250 pounds on the bench press for a different number of repetitions. And we would see, as we implemented that intervention at different times in each of those loads, did we see change? Again, we also did that in between three different athletes. So if we had three athletes doing the bench press, we would take 3 data points for athlete A, 5 data points for athlete B, and 7 for athlete C, and see if we saw, again, that multiple baseline kind of effect there. And then we also would run a multiple baseline between different exercises. So we saw with athlete A, he would do the bench press, the squat, and the deadlift, for example, and we would implement our intervention after differing numbers of baseline data points for each of those as well. The purpose was to implement this, what we call a treatment package that included instantaneous biofeedback plus goal setting. And so again, basically we took these baseline data points with the push sensor attached so we could collect baseline data on velocity with no goal setting and no feedback. Then during intervention, we basically flipped these iPads around so that the athlete could see the velocity with which they were lifting the weight during their session. And so we would set goals prior to each session and say, okay, we're using this weight. Last time you lifted it at this velocity. Today, we're going to try and lift it 0.8 meters per second instead of 0.7 meters per second, say. And then we have that iPad right at the lifting station where they can see in the moment, are they meeting their goal for each repetition? This is kind of, again, what it looks like. I know you saw the video, but kind of this phone up here shows what the athlete would see next to their lifting station, where they would see rep by rep what their velocity was for each individual weight training exercise they were using. And then this bar graph here below shows that for barbell squat, this is like what one session would look like. So this is if the athlete lifted for his barbell front squat 240 pounds, and we were doing 4 sets of 3 reps, right? So each of those little clusters of bar graphs is an individual set of those front squats, and each of the bar graphs each of those individual bars is the velocity for each lift, for each repetition. So that's how we see the individual session data. This is what the kind of the data over time looks like. So this is, again, barbell front squat, and we're looking at average velocity at different dates. I didn't filter this out, so it's not necessarily apples to apples because these are different weights, loads that are being lifted. But I just kind of wanted an example of what it looks like. So this is like a month's worth of data, and we see that you can kind of average or look at an average session velocity during each of those dates as well. So you can, again, track the rep by rep data. You can track this the set by set data, and you can track average velocity over a session, and you can filter out all the different exercises that are involved there. So what we saw some really good baseline data. Our intervention, we started to see some change, and then COVID hit, and we were unable to continue. Obviously, in March, all of college athletics shut down, and we're still not quite back yet. So we're hoping to get this back up and running here starting in the next couple weeks. And hopefully we get some good data there. We're kind of taking that as pilot data and moving on. Just some other things that are part of the push system. So they also have task analysis and video models. So that basically on the right side, it lists kind of like, here's the goal of this individual exercise. Then you can watch video models if you want to work on form. So it has that embedded. So as behavior analysts, I know that's a nice thing for us to have. And then it has this daily wellness questionnaire. Again, I understand that there's a lot of criticisms of self-report data. This is not something that we're making a lot of decisions based upon, but I think it's a nice way to help self-monitor, to work on some of that present moment awareness and to kind of understand how your body's working. So they have kind of just these daily questions that go out to each individual athlete. How did you sleep? What are your energy levels like? How well did you eat? Those kind of things. All right, so that is our velocity-based training segment. We're going to move into behavioral economics, ACT, and exercise. So this is kind of like one larger study, and this is actually kind of what my dissertation is on. So I'll try not to get too nerdy on some of this stuff, but I know behavioral economics can be a little bit dense. So broad strokes, we're looking at a demand analysis and a delay discounting task. Demand analysis is basically just a way that we're quantifying how reinforcing a commodity is. So that's usually done by some version of how much would you pay for this commodity at differing costs. And you can do that in real life, or you can do that through these surveys. And so what we did was a version of a hypothetical purchase task. Hypothetical purchase tasks are just surveys where you're saying, like for alcohol, there's a well-validated one that says, if alcohol was free, how many drinks would you have in a night? What if they cost $1? What if they cost $5? What if they cost 20? And you see over time how an individual continues to respond, and that will tell you or provide some information about how reinforcing this item is based on like how much are they willing to pay for it. And so we did a what's called an exercise purchase task that I'll show you in just a minute, where we're quantifying how valuable exercise is to Division I athletes and comparing that to undergraduate non-athletes. The second piece is this delay discounting, which is we're basically trying to understand how the subjective value of a commodity changes as the time until it's received increases. So the further away a reinforcer is, it becomes less valuable, basically. And so the way we're evaluating that, and it's most commonly evaluated in the research, is to look at smaller sooner rewards and larger later rewards, and you're varying the dimensions of how much of the reinforcer is available and how much time passes before it's provided, and seeing how individuals continue to respond. And I'll show you an example of what that survey looks like here in just a second. Second piece of this intervention is ACT. So ACT is a psychological intervention. It combines acceptance and mindfulness strategies along with these more contingency management values and committed action with the ultimate goal of increasing psychological flexibility. We have these 6 main core processes, and the research on behavioral economics and specifically discounting shows that there are some interventions that improve or that change individuals' discounting rates. So they basically allow individuals to delay gratification for longer periods of time. And a couple of those interventions are mindfulness and contingency management, both which fit nicely within the Hexaflex. But no one has ever actually evaluated the effects of an ACT treatment component or treatment package on delay discounting. So what we did was we had individuals take this exercise purchase task survey and the delay discounting survey. We had them watch an ACT video and demonstrate some ACT exercises, and we then reevaluated the demand for different commodities and the discounting rates. So this is what the exercise purchase task looked like. So we have this kind of scenario above where it's basically how much would you pay for 15 minutes of exercise? It has these kind of different qualifiers in there so that you have to give somebody a vignette so it's very clear what they're buying, basically. But we basically arranged the time from 0 to 180 minutes, so the individuals could buy up to 3 hours of exercise in 15-minute increments. And each unit of exercise started, again, free, and then we increased the cost over time so that we saw that how much exercise would you buy if each 15-minute unit costed $25, right? So probably people are not going to buy very much of that. What about if it's free, right? So we gave them this survey, and what we saw was it actually fit the model of what we expected, this exponential model. This is pilot data, so this is with athletes and non-athletes combined. Our goal is after this to implement it with a larger group. But basically the key here in this figure is that it fit this exponential demand curve nicely. And there were no apparent values between sports. So sorry, I should have mentioned that too. So we evaluated both general exercise, so like weightlifting, running on the treadmill, and sports specific exercise, with the hypothesis being that athletes especially would value their sport specific exercise. Like if they're a basketball player playing basketball, we thought they would value that differently than they would general exercise. And what we saw was there actually wasn't a difference in this pilot study. The other thing that we saw was that basically the point where individuals just stop buying exercise is around $5 per unit. So that's about $20 per hour for both of those commodities. So again, that exercise purchase task, we saw that basically there were no differences between sport-specific exercise and general exercise, and that about $5 individuals stopped being willing to purchase time. In our discounting survey, again, we start with, if you have $200 now or $200 in one day, which would you pick? And everybody picks $200 now. Well, what if it was $180 now versus $200 in one day? What if it was $10 now versus $200 in a day? And then you vary the amount that's received, and you vary how long until it's received. So basically we see, and usually individuals are willing to wait a day for any amount of money, right? But as you start pushing that further off, so would you rather have $100 now versus $200 in 6 months? It gets a little more blurry. So we did this discounting task with 4 different commodities. So we did monetary discounting, food, and then general and sports specific exercise. And what we saw was pretty consistent with, again, the research saying that the hyperboloid function most accurately estimated each of those different commodities. And we saw that in general, money was valued the most highly. So it was discounted the least. So meaning that money lost its value the least over time. Food, exercise, and sports all lost its value much more quickly. Exercise and sport, general exercise and sport specific exercise were both valued at about the same, discounted at about the same rate. And that implementing this ACT intervention prior to completing the survey had a significant effect, a statistically significant effect on all of the commodities. So we saw that it helped them delay gratification to money, food, exercise, and sport, with sport being the most highly effective intervention. So again, this was implemented with a small group of between 15, like I think 8 and 15 people. The next step is that the survey goes out next week on Monday to all 350 athletes. And we're recruiting individuals, undergraduate students from that same university. So that went out on Friday. And so our hope is to get a large sample to replicate these results in a bigger group. All right, our last section here on sports behavior analytics. So I have just a couple like more classic examples of kind of like why is this important. And so, in Watson, when he was first, in the Behaviorist Manifesto, the primary goal of behavior analysis is prediction and control. And Skinner talked extensively about the development of clear and concise operational definitions being essential to the science of behavior, right? So those are kind of like 2 early foundational works citing like why this kind of stuff is important. And then we take that lens and look at sports analytics through it. So a definition of sports analytics is that it's a way of operationally define complex sports specific skills to measure athlete behavior, to evaluate the effects of these behaviors on their performance, to predict the future behavior of athletes and teams, and to create environments to yield the greatest magnitude of reinforcement. So that's magnitude of reinforcement in sports is basically like scoring goals, scoring baskets, and winning, right? So sports analytics are a way to take all these complex behaviors, the way that individual athlete behavior combines to the team behavior and leads to winning, all of these really difficult to measure components that take place day to day, minute to minute in these sports, and how do we quantify that and measure their impact. There have been several different studies that use the matching law to evaluate this, and so we'll talk a little bit about those. And I have some examples of how we're using sports analytics and how it's used in broader sports as well. So the matching law broadly is describing a process in which the response rate matches the level of magnitude or the magnitude of reinforcer delivery. So that could be rate, quantity, quality, all those kind of things. So it's basically we behave in a way that matches the kind of reinforcement that's provided. The applications of that have been used in behavior analysis for a variety of different socially significant behaviors, academic skills, social skills, but also to sports skills. Stilling and Critchfield and Reed and Lucelli both applied the matching law to play calling in football. So they basically looked at how effective were run plays versus pass plays in football and play calling. And they looked at how teams allocated running plays versus passing plays as a result. And so what they saw was that generally across the board, play calling matched the magnitude of reinforcer delivery, and that changed as you got closer to the end of halves and the end of games, where individuals started calling more pass plays and started calling more plays that were associated with higher rates of success than earlier on in the games. There were 3 different studies that looked at 2-point versus 3-point shots in basketball. And so they looked at what rate of shot selection should you take from the 2-point area, and how many shots should you take from outside of that in that 3-point area. And what they saw was that generally more successful teams matched their behavior to reinforcer rate. So the better teams took more 3-point shots when they were successful with that than the teams that were not as good, and that individual athletes did the same, meaning that an individual athlete that was a starter on a Division I program more effectively matched their shot selection with how successful they were, how many points they were scoring for that individual shot. So they were more efficient in their shot selection than individuals that were non-starters. Some examples of that in professional basketball. So Brook Lopez is a really good example. So if we look at these are called shot charts. So this is like, if you look at these individual data points, we see where he was shooting from and how efficient he was in those areas. For the purposes of this, I just want you to look at where he's shooting from in 2010 to 2011 and that season. And all those shots are basically inside the 3-point arc, right? He's pretty clustered around the basket. He does start to step out close to the 3-point line, but really he's not taking any 3-point shots. In 2018, 2019, what we saw is that data-based decisions led him to take basically all of his shots right around the hoop, where he was really efficient, or beyond the 3-point line, right? So he's moved from all these shots that were outside the paint but inside the 3-point line. He just got rid of them. And what we saw was, A, that he scored more points per game, but B, that his salary in 2010-11, when he was shooting these mid-range jump shots, was $2.4 million a year. And then after this 2018-2019 year, whenever he started taking shots only right next to the basket or at the 3-point line, his salary, he just signed a 4-year, $52 million deal, right? So he's accessing more reinforcement on a shot-by-shot basis, and he's also accessing a lot more reinforcement when he's getting paid more. This is an example of the scoring champion in 2007-8, and then 2017-18. So in 2007-8, it was LeBron James, and his shot selection is basically all over the place. So he did take 3-point shots. He took a ton of shots at the rim, but he also has all these shots that he's taking, again, inside the 3-point line, outside the paint. And then we saw James Harden 10 years later, scoring champ that year. All of his shots are either right at the rim, they're inside the paint, or they're outside the 3-point line, right? So basically what this is telling us is that 3-point shots are more efficient, right? 3 points are worth more than 2. And if you can take shots that are, you score more per shot, you're going to receive access to reinforcement more consistently. And that we saw that people were using that data to change their behavior, right? So as behavior analysts, we care about this because it's demonstrating we have data, we're making data-based decisions, and it's changing our behavior. And this is showing across the board, across the league, the top 200 shots. And again, in this 2001, 2002, you have, again, a lot of shots that are right at the rim. You have some that are beyond the 3-point line, but they're really well clustered, like around the baseline here. inside the three-point line, outside the paint. In 2019-20, every shot, every one of the top 200 shots is either inside the paint or outside the three-point line, right? So I just showed you two examples of single subject demonstrations of how single subjects are changing their behavior. And this is looking at a group level, how the league has changed its behavior. My favorite stat is that the three-point line was implemented in the NBA in 1979. If you take every three-point shot that was taken by every single team during the 1980s, it's less than the number of shots the Houston Rockets took in 2017, 2018 alone. So the Houston Rockets alone, one team took more shots than every team put together in the whole decade of the 80s. So it's showing us how behavior change occurs across groups culturally as well. I'm going to show you a quick video of the shot chart, or the way we're using shot charts and the way we're tracking player data here at the university I'm working with.
Technology is obviously very important in maximizing your team's abilities on the court. Being able to give accurate information to your players to help coach them better is something that I believe is a must for any coach trying to maximize his team's abilities.
I tell kids all the time that the hardest thing to do as a person or an athlete is to self-evaluate. Statistics give you the real numbers. Shot tracker's honest. That would be the big word I'd use. You know, the film doesn't lie, shot tracker doesn't lie.
Shot Tracker is a sensor-based solution that tracks statistics and analytics in real time for practicing games. Shot Tracker is made up of 3 components: a player sensor, a shot tracker-enabled ball, and sensors placed around the facility and the arena. All of these 3 components work together to provide real-time data to coaches, players, fans, and broadcast partners.
And Shot Tracker was made for us. It helps us put some meat behind what we say we believe in. We use it in our decision making as we put together a playbook each season and kind of where we're going to put guys and the shots we're going to try and get them in games. I mean, in all those ways, it's integrated completely with what we do.
Fans can get their team stats via the Shot Tracker app. In real time, fans can see how their favorite players are performing. Shot Tracker integrates with broadcast partners, providing announcers enhanced storytelling abilities. Networks can leverage real-time shot charts, player spacing, and ball movement metrics, along with offensive and defensive trend comparison tools, supporting the announcer's commentary live and during replays. Shot Tracker, every stat, instantly.
So that's the program we use. Again, it's called Shot Tracker. And this is just an example of 2 different players that are on our team that are very different players. So the player on the right is a post player. So you see these are basically his numbers during practice. And it shows, you know, the blue areas are areas where he shoots less efficiently. The red areas are those where he's shooting more efficiently. You see we do have a couple red and orange areas near and outside the perimeter, but those are pretty small sample sizes. Again, I'm not asking you to take a whole lot from this data other than to recognize, like, this is how it populates in real time. As a person is shooting, it's giving you this data, and then you're taking that data and providing it to either the individual player, to the team, and you're kind of able to talk about how their behavior is, how their data impacts their behavior, and how you can change behavior with this data over time. This is just an example of another way we use data from the Shot Tracker app. And so it basically, in addition to being able to track individual player data, you can track how individuals play together. So these are just a couple different lineups that were used, and it tracks basically if we have these 5 players out there, they've played, the top line is they played 43 games together, total of 505 minutes. Their offensive rating, which means that their points per 100 possessions. So it's a way to take, like, instead of the total points per game, it's taking that and converting it to more of a rate where you're looking at points per possession kind of thing. And I have how many points per possession or how many points per 100 possessions that group scored, how many points per 100 possessions they gave up, and what that net rating is, which is, again, like if you're taking the offensive rating minus the defensive rating, you get that net rating. And so you can see over time, you get data not just for how your individual is performing, but how individuals are performing together, because you might have somebody who is not scoring very many points. That's hard to measure defensive metrics, but we see that their net rating when they play with this other person who scores a lot of points improves both of their performance, right? So it's a way to kind of quantify what was previously unquantifiable. It's not giving you all this exact information about why, which is, I think, the next place we're going, but it's giving you, we're having the difficulty maybe measuring this athlete's performance, but here's how he impacts the group as a whole, which I think is really interesting. So I think those are kind of the main points to go back and relive some of this. We went over what behavioral sports psychology is and how it's applied to sports performance. We looked at the principles of behavioral economics and how they relate to fitness and sports performance. We talked about intervention methods, so that ACT method for intervening and changing discounting rates. We looked at how sports performance are used to operationalize athlete behavior and lead to prediction and influence. So I think those were the main points. I was hoping to leave about 10 minutes for questions. I think we got there. So that's all I have. This is my email address. If you guys, I know I flew through a lot of those, so if you guys want any additional information, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to talk about this stuff. It's what I'm really excited about. And I feel like we're at a place where we're getting some more attention in these, the health, sports, and fitness area of behavior analysis. But I'd love to see more people doing more of it and to talk about it if you're interested. So thank you guys. I appreciate your time and happy to answer any questions you have.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Brandon. One question that did come up during the presentation from Richard, he was just wondering if the slide deck would be available and if we could send that out.
Yeah, you guys can have access to the slides for sure.
Perfect. And if anyone else has any questions, you can go ahead and take yourself off mute and you can go ahead and ask.
And it looks like some are getting chatted in, so I'll try and scroll through those too, but it's easier for sure if you guys can jump in and ask. Let's see.
Looks like Lily had one question, was wondering if you offer supervision.
I do. So we have some research projects we need some help with now. So if anybody is interested and wants to get involved, happy to connect via email and see what we can do.
Awesome, thank you. And I've never done, I'm from Michigan, so I've never done anything other than in person. Have you had experience with that? Is it still slightly easier to do or a little bit more difficult?
I think everybody has gotten better at everything virtual over the last 6 months. So I think the challenge is, at a distance, being able to find the right group of people to do, if you're interested in doing something like this, making sure that you have the population to work with. But if we can help you kind of identify some good participants and individuals to work with using these interventions, it definitely is doable.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you. I'll probably have to shoot you an email then. Oh,
that sounds good.
Cool. Any other questions that we might have? This was really cool. I feel like I want to go buy my own push band now.
They're actually pretty reasonably priced. I was surprised. They weren't. The Shot Tracker is not reasonably priced. That's ridiculously expensive. I don't think probably we need that, but that push band is definitely doable.
Yeah, definitely. I was thinking the Shot Tracker, you can put it on your dog and just see where they go throughout the day.
Yeah.
I did have another question.
Sure.
I'm currently working in the field of autism, but this is just such like an interesting field that I was like thinking about wanting to like branch into that. What does that look like in terms of like, do you need supervision, and, you know, like what can you do to supplement kind of getting that exposure to the subfield or the field itself without having a lot of resources in the area? Because I know that there's not, to my knowledge, any like ABA sports and fitness people in my area around Youngstown, Ohio.
Yeah. So I think there's a couple different things. So one is like if you're doing pretty basic interventions, like if you're trying to get somebody to drink more water or somebody to get more eat more fruits and vegetables, like things like that, it's a pretty low risk reward, right? Like I wouldn't have gone in without a consultation, a nutritionist on my side and done things like, working with, macronutrient intake or micronutrients where you're working with vitamins and all those kind of things. That stuff is outside scope. But if it's pretty basic stuff, you're really working with more the science of behavior. You're trying to get somebody to change a pretty straightforward behavior versus something that's more complex. So I'd say if you're working on these pretty simple and straightforward targets, the science of the behavior is the best science to work with anyway. So I think you're pretty well within scope doing. When I was working with the university, my role was kind of how do you set up situations where you're monitoring data more effectively? How do we have better measurement procedures? How are we managing the data? And how are we designing interventions effectively so we can demonstrate progress? So I was relying on the sports scientists to develop their lifting routines and those kind of things. So I would say that is a barrier as behavior analysts, we're not getting trained in sports science. So what I found is that the places that have the athletes are going to have those people that can help you identify how to exercise and those kind of things. So you kind of really do have to work with other people in different disciplines. And I think that's been a nice experience for me.
That's awesome. Thank you.
That's a great question, Richard. So Andrea, sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. She said she loved the numbers don't lie statement, and she's curious how these numbers can be demystifying what makes great players, as often mentalistic constructs like intuitive are ascribed. Here you demonstrated that they may be more sensitive to the matching law, at least as applied to shot selection. I guess that was more a comment.
Yeah, and I will definitely say that that it's nice to have data for your players. When you don't have data and you say, hey, maybe you shouldn't be shooting from there, you might piss some athletes off, and they think they're a better 3-point shot shooter than they are. And so being able to say, like, this isn't an intuitive decision I'm making as a coach or as a consultant. It's based on, here is this data that's telling us, hey, you're better if you get to the lane, shoot in the paint, take free throws versus shooting 3-point shot. And then it tells you that might be an area that you need to practice more.
Yeah, definitely. Numbers don't lie. Love it. It looks like Julie's saying that the NSCA is coming out with a sports science certification next year. And she wants to do a shameless plug for the health, sport, and fitness sake. So that'd be cool. Julie, if we could have someone come on and do a presentation to follow up Brandon's, that'd be cool too. I think behavior science and fitness is the new thing, especially in quarantine.
I think that's something that we could probably talk about and get together. And sorry, I'm not on video because I'm actually on my spin bike while I'm listening to Brandon's presentation. So thank you so much, Brandon, for a great presentation today.
Wonderful. So it looks like Ronald had a question. He said, like most in ABA, I've worked primarily in the developmental disabilities ASD field. It is well known that we face challenges with acceptance from entrenched establishments. How is acceptance of behavioral approaches in the sports psychology field?
I think that's a good question. I think part of it is about how you come in and present yourself. So I think that the way I present it is we're doing some different things, right? So I do less of, you're having a difficult time with, your schoolwork. Let's go sit down and talk about it. I do a lot more consulting on, let's get a task analysis of your free throw shooting and look at your form and talk about how to improve that. And so I approach it as like we're complementing each other. We're doing different things. Everyone has additive value, and let's talk about how to leverage everybody's resources effectively. And then I also think, again, coming in and not presenting yourself as like I know everything. I think as behavior analysts, sometimes we feel like we have the science of behavior, so we know all, we see all. And so I think being very clear about like coming in with humility and recognizing the things you do well, and then being willing to learn. Like I had to learn a whole new science working with this guy who was the sports performance director. He knew all the exercise science, and I was kind of at his mercy in terms of, hey, you develop these programs, I'll help you figure out how to change the athlete's behavior to fall in line with that. So just finding what your niche is, staying within your discipline and your lane, and then letting other people do what they do well too.
I think that's so important. It's always coming in with that humble slice of pie. That humble pie. So it is 11 a.m. Pacific time. So I didn't, I want to respect Brandon's time as well and everyone else's. So I am going to wrap up here. If you do have any further questions, you can also directly email Brandon. I did send out the email address in the chat, but I will send it out in another follow-up email. So once again, huge big thank you to Brandon for this amazing presentation. I'm just inspired now. I want to go out and shoot some hoops and put on my push band. So that's going to be a big purchase. And to everyone else, go ahead and fill out the survey when that comes out, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.